Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm working on this 10-horse Briggs & Stratton engine. Some of you might remember this one. It came on a storm responder generator that I recently published a video on, and it ran out of oil and threw the rod. That said, it survived the trauma pretty well. The piston came out in one piece, basically brand new. The crankcase survived, and the cylinder did have some light superficial marks, but after 30 seconds of honing, it cleaned up really well. So this was looking like a good rebuild candidate until I found a little chunk missing at the bottom of the cylinder right there. So yeah, I was kind of on the fence as far as what I wanted to do. A lot of you commented after that video that this is a rebuildable engine, and I tend to agree. So I am going to attempt it today. I did buy a new connecting rod, a new head gasket, I have a new sump gasket, and I have two crankshafts. This is the one that came out of the engine. It did suffer a lot of damage, a lot of aluminum transfer, so we'll try to clean that up, see if it's salvageable. Worst case, I do have another crankshaft that is within spec, so I think we're going to be able to rebuild this engine. So let me get you set up a little bit better. I want to start by cleaning up this crankshaft. We'll measure it up and see if it's any good. To clean off the aluminum, I use muriatic acid. It works very well for dissolving the aluminum. And I'm also going to be using some baking soda that will neutralize the acid when we're done. And it's good to have close by as well, just in case you drip any acid. Now, in this case, this is the acid right here, and I've cut up this little piece of cloth, and I'm going to wrap it around the journal, and I'll give it about 10 minutes. I'll check on it and most likely just swap it out for a fresh cloth with some fresh acid. And that's going to have to be done, I would say, a good 3 or 4 times until all the aluminum is gone. I'm just going to hold the microphone up to it. You can actually hear the reaction the acid in the aluminum is making. Some pretty strong stuff. Just double checking the calibration on this micrometer. I made the mistake of leaving it in here in the vise, and my kids were messing around with it, so it still seems to be calibrated. So I'm going to set this to 3.5 inches. Actually, 3.3 inches. That's the standard size on the bore. And we'll just double check that it's still within spec. That should be 3.3. It looks like we're zeroed out. So let's go see what that bore looks like. So hopefully you can see this okay. I'm going to check first from left to right, starting at the top, middle, and bottom of the ring travel. Pretty much at 0, maybe 0.5 thousandth of wear. In the middle, pretty much 0. In the bottom of the ring travel, 0 as well. So no appreciable wear from left to right. Let's check top to bottom. Now we'll check from top to bottom, starting at the top of the ring travel. Pretty much nowhere at the top. The middle, 0.1 thousandth of wear. And the bottom. just over 1,000th of wear. So we're within spec. The specs say we can be up to 4,000ths out, and at most we're 1,000th.5. And out around, it's only allowed 1,000th.5, and we're just under that. So I think we'll be fine. Guess while we're here, we'll check the camshaft real quick, starting with the journals on either side. Standard size is 0.499, and that's exactly what we get. Let's check the other side. 0.4985. So, oh, now we're in spec. So yeah, no issues with those journals. Let's check the lobes. Standard size is 1.216. So we'll check the intake first. 1.2165, so we're actually 5/10,000ths over. And the exhaust valve, 1.216. So yeah, that camshaft is perfect. It's been just over 10 minutes. You can see that aluminum turned black. Let's just wipe that off and see what we have. Yeah, still got a ways to go. It's been at least another 10 minutes. And yeah, this one's going to be a little bit longer than most. There's a lot of aluminum on there. But yeah, let's keep going. Usually takes at least 40 minutes. Sometimes up to an hour of doing this. I think we're done. I don't hear any more sizzling of that aluminum. So we'll get the acid out of the way and just neutralize what's left on here. That's mostly just to prevent pitting and rust on the crankshaft. So once we get it polished up, it is going to have to be thoroughly oiled to protect what hopefully is a good crankshaft. And to polish this up, I'm going to start with 800 grit, go to 1500, and then 3000. This is just WD-40 to help lubricate it. And I might cut off a little bit of extra. I don't actually want to wrap it too tight around the crankshaft. And what I find works pretty well is just a piece of rope wrapped around a few times. And then just spin the paper. And you don't have to go crazy. I mean, this was just about, 15, 20 seconds? I can tell already. I mean, it's cleaned up quite well. So I don't need any more 800 grit. So we'll go to the next size, the 1500. Just going to do a quick reality check here. It's clean enough. I should be able to get a good measurement on it. So checking from left to right, we get 1.2479, which is within spec. The standard size is 1.2485. We're allowed a thousandth of wear. So I think the real test will be to check from top to bottom, because that's usually where the most wear occurs. All right, this is going to be the real test here. Usually this is where it's out of spec. And the reject size, according to the service manual, is 1.2475. There are other Briggs documents that say the reject size is 1.2465. So hopefully we're above both. And in this case, we are. We're at 1.24775. So, yeah, I think it's looking promising. Let me finish polishing it. I'll take a series of 3 measurements from each plane and double check the journals on each side. But I think this crank is going to be usable. The numbers are in, and for the most part, I think we're going to be okay. The camshaft basically measured as new, no appreciable wear. And of course, we do have a new connecting rod. So these 2 parts are not an issue. As far as the cylinder goes, we're allowed 4 thousandths of wear. And the largest area of wear I could find was 1.3 thousandths of an inch. So you would think we're good, but we are borderline out of round. At the bottom of the ring travel, from left to right, there's no wear. And from the top to the bottom, that's where the 1.3 thousandths of wear is. And the reject size is 1.5. So we are right up against it. You know, that said, we're not past it. We're not even at it. So I think we'll be okay. Now, the crankshaft, I also took 6 measurements there. 3 on the top, 3 on the side. And 5 of the 6 measurements were fine. The one from top to bottom on the flywheel side, that was at 1.2475, which according to the service manual is the reject size. Now, I do have another Briggs document that says it's actually 1.2465. So, yeah, depending upon which one you believe, we're either at the reject size or we have 1,000th left. You know, regardless, I think we'll be okay, because even if you believe the service manual, if we had 2 new parts here, we'd have 1.5 thousandths clearance between the connecting rod and the crankshaft. And when you look at the reject sizes of both of these parts, you don't get to the reject size until you have 5.5 thousandths clearance between the connecting rod and crankshaft. And right now we're only at 2.5 thousandths, the best I can tell. So I'm going to double check that. If that is in fact the case, then we're not even halfway there to the reject size. So I'm going to use a bit of Plastigauge. We'll measure the gap, and I believe we're going to see that it's about 2.5 thousandths, in which case we're fine. I'm just going to wipe off the oil because that will impact the result. And I don't think I showed you that shine either. It came out really nice for a blown up engine. Usually they don't look this good ever again. And that is my last piece of Plastigauge, so hopefully I don't drop this. So the idea is you break off a piece that's going to lay right across the journal. So you want to break it off at the right spot, and it looks like we might have enough to do this twice if I mess it up. Because what can happen is that this will fall off while I'm trying to put the connecting rod on, and then I'll never find it. Then torque it to spec, which is 100 inch-pounds. And the idea is this is just going to smush the Plastigauge. And then they gave you a little gauge on the package to measure how much it's smushed. And based on that, you know the clearance. I nearly had a heart attack when I took the cap off and saw that Plastigauge right in the middle was not smushed at all. And that was actually my fault because just bad placement. There is a hole in the cap, and that's where the oil gets in to oil that journal. Anyway, the way you read this is with the chart that comes on the Plastigauge. The more smushed this is, the tighter the clearance. And starting on the left here, we have 1/1000th of an inch, which clearly that is not. The next measurement is 1.5 thousandths. And we're not that. We're a little bit bigger. If we go over to 2 thousandths, and we're actually, I would say, a little bit less than 2 thousandths. So that is ideal. I mean, 1.5 thousandths is if we had all new parts. And we are pretty close to that. So I think we're good. Before I go any further, I'm going to get the borescope in there and just take a really close look at the damage. I want to make sure there are no cracks extending into the cylinder, which is just going to cause the engine to fail. And assuming we're good, then I'm going to knock off the rough edge right where the brake is, and then hone it again for about 5 seconds just to make sure there's no burrs or any defects that piston can hang up on. already cleaned up the sump cover. All the gasket material is gone, and all the junk that was inside has been cleaned out. So that is more or less ready to go. So I'm going to turn my attention to the block. We need to clean the head, get the old gasket material off where the cover goes, and just finish cleaning out all the little bits in there. It is slow going, but I would say we're just about there as far as the sealing surfaces go. Now the inside of the block, it does need more work, although I've gotten all the big chunks out of it. There is still grit and debris, so I'm going to spare you guys. I'm going to pause it here. I'm going to clean it out very thoroughly with some degreaser and rinse it with hot water and soap and blow it dry. Just make sure all the little bits are out. Block's been thoroughly cleaned and is ready to go. I also spent some time on the piston. There was a lot of carbon buildup on the top, so all that's been removed. The rings, although they weren't stuck, they were pretty gummy, so that's been cleaned up as well. The only thing left on the piston really is just to pull off this broken connecting rod and get the new one installed. So I'm going to do that next, and then the last thing to do is deal with the head. I want to get the valves out, just spin them in a drill, make sure they're not bent. And assuming they're good, we'll clean the valves up and the head, and we'll be ready to get this thing back together. There's only one circlip on this piston, so this pin only comes out on this side. So just use a little screwdriver and try to work that out without losing it. There's the clip. And then that pin, you should be able to push out. In this case, I'm using a 1/4-inch socket. And sometimes these bend when the connecting rod lets go. Hopefully that's not the case, because then they don't really come out that well. And this one isn't coming out. Or is it? Maybe tap on that a bit with a hammer. Don't want to go crazy here. Just some light taps should come out pretty easily. It's coming out, but it is tight. So we might need a new pin, potentially. I did order a new pin. So let me grab that. So this one is definitely tighter than it should be. This is the new pin. I'm just going to test fit it real quick. Make sure it slides in without excessive force. Yeah, and that one fits a lot better. So let me grab the new connecting rod. Going to use a little assembly lube. Motor oil is fine as well. And you want to make sure you install this the right way. The top of the piston, it does have an arrow. It points towards the flywheel or the magneto, and it's labeled MAG on one side and PTO on the other side. PTO is the side that faces the generator or the tapered shaft. So in this case, we want mag to face out in the direction of the arrow. So let me just put a little bit of oil in here. Make sure everything's lubed up real nice. Check the alignment. And we'll slide the pin right in. That's perfect. And the new connecting rod did come with a circlip, a new one, so we'll use that. I think that's it. We're in. So there's the intake valve. Bit of carbon on that. And let's get the exhaust out. All right, I'm going to spin these in the drill. Just make sure they're not bent. All right, let's take a look at the exhaust. We'll spin that. Valve stem seems nice and straight. How about the intake? That one looks good too. So I'm just going to use a bit of Scotch-Brite, some WD-40. We'll clean those valves up. Not too bad. Let's try the exhaust. So it's the same process to prepare this sealing surface like we did on the head. Just the razor blade to knock the big chunks off. We use the Roloc 3M bristle brush to clean up the surface. And for the carbon buildup here, I am going to use a Dremel tool with a stainless steel wire brush. So I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to show, especially in here. This carbon is really caked on there, so it's going to take a while to get this cleaned up. I think I've taken this about as far as I can. There is still some carbon on there, but after about 40 minutes, I would say these pieces are not going to come off without one heck of a fight. So I'm okay with it being almost perfect. We'll start with the exhaust valve, and just a bit of valve lapping compound should be enough. And I also got some new suction cups because my old ones, after about 3 years, they've become a little bit petrified and they're not really working too well anymore. So hopefully the new ones will fix that issue. That looks pretty good. Just going to double check it, clean up the seat, drop the valve in, and just push down lightly. It shouldn't spin. If it does, then something isn't right. Yeah, the exhaust is good. Let's do the intake. Perfect. So let's start getting this thing back together. Just start by getting a little bit of assembly lube on the valve stem. This is the exhaust valve, so we'll do that one first. This can be a little tricky. I've had these tools slip off, the spring flies across the garage, and you never find it again. And the keeper is just held on, or sorry, the valve spring retainer, it's just held on by these two keepers. So the easiest way to do it is to put a bit of grease on them to make them sticky. And one side is tapered, the other side is wider. So the tapered side goes down. Okay, that one's good. I think that one is too. Yeah, should be good. Let's do the intake. I think that's it. Guess we'll find out. I think we're good. But to be sure, just tap it with a rubber mallet. It's better to have these fly apart now than in the engine. We're good. So an important step is to check the ring end gaps. And these rings, they're not new, so they should be fine. You know, that said, it's still good to double check and just make sure there's no excessive gap. You know, in this case, the standard gap should be between 8 and 16 thousandths of an inch. Reject size is 30 thousandths, and I can tell by looking at it, it's a really tight gap. So 8 thousandths does fit. So does 10. And 11, I have some drag. So the rings are actually in very good shape. I've already checked the others. They're all equally as tight. So these rings should be fine. These rings are marked. So the mark goes up. And if you saw the first video, you would know that these end gaps for the first and second rings, they were more or less lined up. And I'm assuming that's why this burned oil so quickly. And surprisingly, the Briggs service manual does not mention anything about, you know, how they recommend to set these end gaps. So some engines, they say do 120, 120, 120 for each of the three rings. And the bottom ring is actually made up of three. So that one should be offset by 20 degrees for each ring. You know, in this case, I'm going to clock them 180 degrees out from each other, the first ring and the second ring. And the bottom ring, it's aligned right about there, and then they're each offset about by 20 degrees. That right there is the timing mark for the camshaft. And you want to make sure you get this right. There should be a timing mark right there. I just torqued this to 100 inch-pounds, which is what the service manual says. Now, there are some other Briggs documents that call for 200 inch-pounds, and that's what I usually see on covers. So I'm going to bring this up to 200. I filled this up with WD-40 24 hours ago, and it held just fine. Usually, you know, within about 5 or 10 minutes. So the valves are sealing pretty well. Yeah, just take note, the bolts, they are all the same length, but the one on the top left is a different color. And that's the one closest to the exhaust. But top dead center, and 4 thousandths does not fit on either valve. So both valves need to be opened up just a bit. 5 feels good. 6 is pretty tight. And 7 does not fit. So the intake is good. Five fits. And 6 does not. So let's just rotate the engine. We'll double check it. So we're at the top dead center, or just a bit past. 5 is good. 6 is not. 5 is good. 6 fits. 7 does not. So that's fine. If anything, the intake could be tightened up, maybe 1/1000th. But it's within spec, so that should be good. Don't forget the key. And make sure you mount the ignition coil the correct way. Technically, you could flip it upside down and it would go on just fine. But when it's upside down, the spark is going to be very weak and the timing will be off. So just be aware. This one's actually labeled this side out, so it's hard to mess that one up. Then rotate the engine so the magnet's under the coil. And you can use a business card to set the gap. Should be 0.010 of an inch, which is what most business cards are. And once you loosen the coil up, just push it up against the magnet. And then snug it up. Don't torque it down too much. These bolts strip out very easily. And rotate the engine, make sure the coil isn't hitting the flywheel. and we're good. I'm tempted to just bolt this on and pull the cord, but if I do that, it's not going to work. So we'll have a quick look inside and make a decision as far as whether to clean it or not. Pretty clean. A few bits of debris down there. And the smell is actually pretty bad. It does smell like varnish, even though there's really not much in here. So yeah, this one isn't too bad. Assuming the main jet isn't clogged, which it's not, I can actually see through it. So this should run. I'm just going to clean the bowl out, get the junk out, and we'll bolt it back on and put it on the machine. I think we'll be good. I think a majority of that dirt actually just came off the brush I used rather than the bowl. These studs, they are an E5 Torx socket. Not a common tool to have, but if you work on small engines, you will use this not only on Briggs, but I think certain other engines like Tecumseh. Some of the models use this type of socket as well. And without it, you can double nut the stud. The stud, though, it's pretty short, so it's hard to get two nuts on there fully without damaging the threads. When I start this, I don't want it running at full speed, which is 3600 RPM. So there's two ways to slow it down. I can bend this tab to the right to take some spring tension off, or I can relocate the spring on a hole that's closer, which will also decrease the spring tension. So I think that's what I'm going to do. These holes are all labeled. The ones on the right are lettered. So right now we're in letter E, and on the inside they're numbered. And I'm going to move it, I think, to number 5. And this spring's actually a little bit odd because on this engine, usually the spring is on a number, not a letter. So I don't know if someone was messing around. Generally, you don't want to touch this if you don't have to, because changing where the spring is on the arm changes not only the speed, but the sensitivity. So it'll respond differently when it's under load. Okay, that should be good. And that's pretty much it. Theoretically, this should be a good running engine. I guess we'll find out. Now, I'm going to leave this off for now. I want to have easy access to the governor spring so I can make some adjustments as needed. And I'm going to leave this plastic piece off as well. A lot of people don't realize what this is. And I would say 99% of the time you don't need it. The purpose of it is to actually recirculate hot air as it comes off the head and bring it right into the intake. It's for cold weather operation. When it's below freezing, it prevents the carburetor from icing up. Now in hot weather, like it is now, it's just going to heat the engine up more than it should. And that's not going to help with oil consumption. So I've always theorized that's why these engines run out of oil, is because people leave this on. The engine runs hot. It consumes oil faster than it should. And of course, we know the weakness of this engine is a lack of oil. I've only seen these engines fail due to lack of oil. So I think this is part of it. I would say remove this. Most likely you're not going to need it most of the time. Of course, check the oil before you run the engine or when you refuel. And in this case, we also saw the first and second ring, the end gaps were lined up. So yeah, all these things, they don't help. Oil sensor would have protected against that. But yeah, not so lucky on this machine. So let's get this outside. We'll pull the cord and hopefully it runs well and doesn't blow up. Got the fuel plugged in and turned on. So far, no leaks. So we're off to a good start. Let's give the cord a pull, see what happens, and assuming everything goes well, I'm just gonna let it run for an hour or so, or until we're out of fuel, whatever one comes first. I think we're looking pretty good. It started first pull. The engine sounds good and has no issues running at low speed or high speed, and the governor seems to be responding well. So I had to add those 2 stakes because the engine was vibrating the board across the yard. But like this, I think will be good for the duration. So I'll just let it run. We'll check back in a bit and see how it did. The engine ran for about 45 minutes until we ran out of fuel, and absolutely no issues to report. It started first pull, surprisingly no smoke from the exhaust, and the carburetor had no issues running the engine at low speed or high speed. So to answer the question, is this rebuildable? I would say yes. The bigger question is, how long will it last? The original owner said he only had about 50 hours on this engine before it blew, and I think that was largely due to the ring end gaps on the piston. They were aligned. It would have allowed a lot of oil to be consumed by the engine until it ran out, because this has no oil sensor, and now those rings are 180 degrees apart, so I don't think that issue will reoccur. I think the bigger concern is just the piston. Is it getting scratched up on that damage, and will the engine fail sooner than later? I think only time will tell. I need to put more hours on the engine, and either it's going to blow up, in which case I'll know, or I need to take it apart at some point and inspect the piston and make sure it's not sustaining any additional damage. But for now, I accomplished what I set out to do. This is now a good running engine. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.